Good evening, and welcome to Hello, It's Us, Perspectives on Inclusion. This program is dedicated to educating the general public about issues that are important to people with disabilities. We hope that as you view this program, you will recognize that those very same issues are important to everyone, since people with disabilities are certainly a significant part of the general public. Hello, It's Us is brought to you through a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop, and our good friends here at Public Access Television. My name is Mike Hoenig. I work at the Center for Disabilities and Development as a program coordinator, and I serve as a co-host of Hello, It's Us. Keith?
I'm the other co-host. I am a disability advocate. And I'm like Ruby Harvey. I'm almost finished with the complete book. It's in prototype. And I'd like to welcome Darrel as a guest. Welcome.
Thank you. It's glad to be here.
So we are doing something a little unique this month. This is October, and with October being Disability Employment Awareness Month, we thought it would be fun to sit down and talk with Darrel about the benefits of employment. And as we do that, Keith and I are actually also going to talk about our experiences with employment. We've all three of us experienced disability. We come from very different perspectives, but I think we're all in agreement about how important employment is in our lives. So Darrel, again, as Keith said, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you currently do for work, and anything else you'd like to share.
For sure. Well, firstly, being here and talking about disabilities, I think sometimes my experience and perspective is unique or interesting in that 20 years of my life I lived without a disability. So I've been on both sides of that, what I think of as the line of social justice, where I had privilege as a person, not identified as having a disability and not experiencing some of the environmental barriers of living with a disability, and then also on this other side of it, and how people treat us socially, and just all of those environmental inaccessibilities that we face. So I think that's why I like to talk about this, because I think our general public is, as we know, filled with people with and without disabilities, and I've lived both experiences. But my employment history, I actually came to Iowa City as a student and stuck around here and got a bachelor's and master's degree. And for the past decade, it's now over a decade, I've been employed as a social worker in different settings. So all locally, but I now am a mental health counselor at the University of Iowa Counseling Service. So I specifically provide counseling service for University of Iowa students.
Great. And as we proceed with this discussion, I think it'll be very interesting. We have some questions and discussion points that we're going to highlight. And having you share your perspective, now I realize you were 20, so you probably weren't so much in the job market before you acquired your disability, but certainly some of those attitudes and the different perceptions that you face as a blind person versus as a sighted person. I think that's going to be really interesting to hear more about. So, Keith, would you like to share your employment background?
It was a little different than Darrel because I went to work way back in the 70s in New Jersey. And we didn't have ADA, and they didn't have any idea of accommodation yet. But I feel we've come a long way. And I don't denote my work because of that. I learned a lot. And what I learned, I put to use, Mike.
Yes, you did.
As I grow older.
Well, we've worked together in one capacity or another for over 30 years,
Yes.
going back to the good old days of grad school
Right.
here in Iowa.
Michael, let's hear from your perspective.
Well, I have a perspective that's different than the two of you, which is great. So I grew up on a farm in southeast Iowa, and my dad had a very, very strong work ethic. And so he preached that to us, as I have two siblings that are older than I am. And so I just, from the time that I can remember, I always thought I would go to work somewhere. But it really got interesting because after my senior year in high school, I thought, I really have to do something with my life in the summer times. I just didn't, the idea of just kind of hanging around at the house didn't appeal to me. And I knew I was entering college and friends were getting summer jobs. And so I thought I better get one also. So at that time, there was a program called it was called CETA, C-E-T-A. I think it was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act or something like that. It later became or morphed into the Job Training Partnership Act. But it was designed to support people with disabilities and people from disadvantaged backgrounds to have some work experience. And I've always enjoyed working with seniors, and I decided, well, maybe I should see if I could go to work at the nursing home, the local nursing home during the summer. And it was so ironic because my dad said, oh, you don't really need to do that. And I thought, well, now where's this coming from? And I think he was just being protective, but it was a very good experience. And CETA did not allow you to go back and continue to do the same job. And at some point, that's really what I wanted to do. And I think the third summer, the administrator of the nursing home said, oh, we don't need CETA, we'll just hire you for the summer, which was pretty awesome. So that was my first experience. And then I finished undergrad and went to grad school here at Iowa and wasn't really sure what I was going to do when I got done. But my rehab counselor actually encouraged me to do an internship at the Department for the Blind. And I did that, and after that had an opportunity to go to work as a rehabilitation teacher. Did that for about 3.5 years, moved to Illinois, eventually went to work for a nonprofit advocacy organization called the Illinois-Iowa Center for Independent Living, which is where, Keith, you and I reconnected because you were working for what was then the Connor Center.
Yes.
And then I, through my connections with working at the center, I met Bob Bacon, who is a good friend of both of ours, and who recently retired as a director of the UCED, the University Center for Excellence on Disabilities. And they were, the UCED CDD, well at that time it was hospital school, was had written a grant to start an advocacy training program for people with disabilities. And I applied for it. Keith, I think you might have been on that search committee.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough to be selected. And so 25 years later, I just passed my 25th anniversary at CDD. I'm still here. So.
And here we are again, working together.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So that's been interesting. It's been an interesting, and I had no idea when I took the job, it was a 3-year grant. And I have some wonderful friends here in town that I stay with when I have to stay late. I commute from Davenport, and I wanted to pay them when I was introduced to them, and they said, no, we have an extra room, you're welcome to stay here, well, that's our contribution to your grant. And I just saw them the other day, and I said, well, Mary, 25 years later, you're still contributing. So we got a good laugh out of that. So let's kind of move off of the background and talk a little bit about some of the benefits of employment, whether they be financial, psychological, social, any other kind of benefits that folks want to talk about. And we'll kick this one to you again, Darrel. We'll eventually kind of reorder things, but we'll kick this one to you and let you start us off here.
For sure. Well, Mike, I connected with your childhood, and when I think of my parents, even today, I just think hardworking people that really value finding purpose in doing your best, whatever your best may be. So going blind when I was 20, it was such a grieving process, not just with the not being able to see. You know, there was a lot of secondary losses, and one of the biggest one for me was I worked as a student manager at the University of Iowa bookstore, and that was my college family, was the bookstore. And saying goodbye to that family, and then saying goodbye to having purpose and doing productive work. And I mean, I had had a job since I was like 12. Anything I could do to make money and be productive, and it really was a sense of identity. So my world was turned upside down, and not being a person that I thought of as being a productive part of society. So when you talk about the benefits, like the thing that jumps out at me right away is like having purpose, like that I am contributing to this community. I'm contributing to our culture, you know, contributing to, like I think about today, just our future. I work with students, so purpose is number one. But yeah, I could keep going with benefits, you know, and that university bookstore years ago was my college family. Today, I do think of my coworkers as my work family. You know, I establish my friendships at work, and we do things outside of work, and if I'm there over 9 hours a day, like, they're often the people I'm turning to for support, but also just laughter and staying on top of what's happening in the world, and even making connections with their families and their loved ones. So it really is, it's a home, it's a community.
Yeah, I get that, because I think I would totally agree with you on the purpose thing. I'm at an age where, you know, I've started to think about either scaling back or retirement. I mean, I'm not 60 yet, but you know, the thought starts to come into your mind, and I walked into the office today, and all these emails were there about trying to schedule a disability awareness activity at CDD, and then I knew I had the show today, and we have a leadership trainee that's going to be presenting tomorrow, and at our noon seminar. And I thought, man, you know, those are things that if I were to leave employment, those you would find other purpose, I think. But there is that real connection, and I'm also with you, Darrel, on the work family. We've recently gone through a transition at CDD where we've had a number of people moving on. And so what's been interesting, I've kind of started to refer to them as the extended family now, because, you know, even after they do move on, when you've developed those friendships, you do stay in touch. And so, and it's also an opportunity to meet new people, both within your organization and at the local, state, and national level. You know, partnerships, and we have our national association meeting coming up next month, and I've already started reaching out and making contacts for that time that time in DC. So, you know, it can become a pretty large extended family, work family. It's pretty fun to think about that.
As a retiree, I felt very lost without going to work every day, but I'm using the time productively with the show and writing a book and keeping busy. Darrel, I would like to know what kind of accommodation, if you need them, what do you have at work?
Yeah. That question varies through time. When I first
Good.
got out of graduate school, actually before I even graduated, I got my first, what I think of as full-time employment in my professional career, and that was at Mecca here in Iowa City, which is now Prelude, yes. And going into there, all of our documentation was done, with computers, but paper filing. And we don't live in a world anymore, at least I don't, where we're doing paper filing.
Thank goodness.
Yes, thank goodness. Because to gather information about clients that have been in our service before was really difficult. We were still doing a lot of handwritten things, and even the software out there, the object character recognition software, I couldn't access that. So early on, the accommodations were, like I just mentioned, getting that OCR software, getting a screen reader for the computer, using that, but also just being really creative. It worked out really nicely that I got my master's in social work, because part of the social work perspective is being solutions focused.
Yes.
And so when I walked into this system where there were just procedures that were not accessible, were not allowing me to do my job and do my job efficiently, I luckily was good at advocating, and that's another part of my story of getting involved with the consumer organization and networking with blind people and other people with disabilities that said, hey, you have every right to step into this system and make changes to make it more accessible and usable for everyone. So I was creative, I advocated for myself, and we established procedures and techniques. My savior, again, as a blind person, and I can't be a big enough advocate, would have been Braille. At that time, even we're dealing with HIPAA and people's personal health information. I really don't want to be mixing this stuff up. I want to be on top of my game, and that required Braille and a filing system and being able to access all the resources to give to clients. And I think it was important to point out that it was Mecca. Mecca's a nonprofit organization. They don't have a set-aside budget per se to make the system accessible for people with disabilities. So it did take more problem solving. And I also involved the Iowa Department for the Blind at that time to see where they might help with either technology or again, that was my first job. So it wasn't like I had a lot of money sitting around to buy technology that costs sometimes thousands of dollars. So using vocational rehabilitation services was important.
So back in the day when you worked for Mecca, and it sounds like things were not primarily computer-based, did you end up having to have readers at times, or did you set up things with your coworkers, or did you just kind of do what the situation dictated? And
I used what I could, but I learned to be very, very friendly and patient and kind, and in some ways even loving with the clerks and secretaries where I've worked, knowing that there was going to come a time where I'm please read this, or please even glance at this, because I'm going to be handing this to a client or a client's family, and I need to make sure it's the right thing, because I tucked it away and I folded a corner and it came unfolded and I don't know what this is anymore. All those little tips and tricks. And I had an expectation for myself that I was going to see as many clients as my peers and do as effective work as I possibly can. And so I better figure out some of these paths to getting things done. And so we would creatively use coworkers. And what I found is coworkers generally, I say generally, but I can't even think of an example where coworkers oh, that's a nuisance or that's a burden to have to step in and read something that's not been made accessible to you. So yeah, Mike, you hit on it. It's you get creative and you use what you can use, and but even systems changed where I found at Mecca, well, this makes more sense that we would have a shared folder that everybody could access this information and wouldn't have to go back to a paper file.
Yeah, I ran into somebody at a gathering the other day that I hadn't seen in like 20 years, and it was somebody that I used to work with, the partner of somebody I used to work with, and so of course that reminded me of him. And I remember the first time he reached out to me. He was the director of our education department at CDD at the time, and he wanted me to do a presentation, and I remember somebody actually recording a message to me that he wanted to get in touch, and that's how I used to get my messages. You know, it was before voicemail, or at least our system didn't have voicemail. So, we had email, but it was just kind of still in its infancy. In fact, it was just an internal program primarily, although we were then able to connect to the internet. But it was definitely a learning process, and as you say, it morphed over time. Keith, you probably had your, what were some of the accommodations that you had to work through?
Darrel, I can equate with you, even in school, because I used to have people take notes for me in class. And that was before the computer onset. So I used to buy a lot of notepaper and carbon paper and give it to the best writer in class to get things done.
Did you have to go through Student Disability Services?
Yes.
You did, okay. I didn't know if you'd done that or...
But mainly I did it on my own.
Just found a person that could write well?
Yes.
So what about when you worked at the center? I know that, we worked on a couple of grants together. Did you have somebody that assisted you with writing some of the reports? And
we had a man, a fellow that had seizures, and he needed light work. So he used to come in part-time and do all my typing and notes.
Oh, that's right. I'd forgotten about that.
So that's how I got through. But being disabled as I am, I noticed the more adaptive I can be, the more I can do on my own.
Yeah, it's all about being creative.
Yes.
Well, we've got a few minutes here, and one of the things that, Darrel, you already touched a little bit on, Keith and I haven't, but you may have some other things that you want to add, are just the whole process, and to the extent that you're comfortable, I'd be interested in, you were, it sounds like you were on a career path that certainly you had your student employment. I don't know if you were planning to go into social work before you lost your vision. But I would find it, I think, and our audience would find it interesting to hear how you got where you are in terms of maybe even selecting the career path. You mentioned the Department for the Blind. If you had any other support along the way to get to your first job and then moving forward.
Yes, yeah. So if we go back to when I was 20 and going blind, I say it jokingly, but it was a really tough time in my life that I took a semester off to go blind. Because somehow, and I lost all of my sight quickly, but I only did take a fall semester off.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I struggled horribly because I still didn't really know how to be blind. I didn't have the skills to navigate this world successfully. So I was working really hard and using a lot of brain power and asking friends and family for help, but really not living independently, really not being very efficient or actually very effective in the bigger picture. So eventually got direction to go to the Iowa Department for the Blind orientation center in Des Moines. And right in downtown Des Moines, there's a program there, the Orientation Center, where you can gain the skills of blindness. And I actually lived there for 3 months, and that is where I learned to use the speech program with the computer, so a computer that talks, and cane travel, and braille, and home economic skills, so even like cooking and taking care of the home. They have a shop class where you use power tools, like a wood shop class, and all for building confidence. And another class called the Business of Blindness, which is focused on attitude. And that was enormous in terms of, like, I spoke earlier about having a work ethic, and for a while having this dream shattered that I was going to be, a professional with a job, and that home and that life that I had envisioned for myself when I was sighted. I thought that had gone away. And in this class and talking to all these other blind people, they were saying, no, you can have this again. Believe in it, you can do it. And they even hired me the next summer to work in their program, which was a really boost of confidence. And then the following year, I actually taught as a teaching assistant 20 hours a week in my graduate program. So I got into grad school, and that too was one of those providing purpose, making connections, networking, building a resume, and just believing that my expectations for myself were like my non-disabled peers. Like, I'm going to hold a job while I'm going to grad school. Like, I'm going to do that. So for me, it only made sense that I actually started working at Mecca, which I talked about, April of 2008, whereas I didn't graduate till May. So
I accomplished your goal there.
Yes, and part of that though was driven by the fear that my blindness would impede me from this goal, and so I worked really hard and maybe got out of the gate faster than my peers to secure that job, because I was scared at some point someone wasn't going to give me a chance.
Yeah, boy, it's so funny. 'Cause we have not rehearsed this or planned it, but so many of those stories resonate with me, because I went to the counselor ed program here with Keith,
Yeah.
and there had been a blind student that had preceded me and apparently did not have a lot of success. And so I think that was one of the things that I had to battle throughout my time. At first I thought, well, when I found that out, I thought, well, this will be easy because I can just prove that I can. But there was a lot of baggage left over, and so having to fight that was a challenge. Believe it or not, and we'll pick up this discussion during the second half of this series, because Keith, we want to hear your story about job search, but our time for part one is coming to a close. I really want to thank you, Darrel, for taking the time to come in, and we're very much looking forward to continuing this discussion of employment and people with disabilities. So I hope all of you will tune in 2 weeks, probably, is when this will be shown, for the second episode. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank all of you for watching on PATV and on our YouTube channel, and also like to once again thank our sponsors. Keith, any final thoughts?
Have a good week out there. Enjoy the weather while we have it.